Hi guys, thank you for coming out to the Baton Rouge Press Club. I am a board member on the Press Club. My name's Julie O'Donoghue. I'm the interim editor of a news nonprofit called Louisiana Illuminator. My speakers today are two women who work at the Sexual Trauma and Response Organization, probably better known as STAR. STAR provides services for people who are survivors of sexual assault. Those are legal and counseling services and several other kinds of services that I'm not going to get into right now, but those are two of the primary things. So our first speaker is Racheal Hebert. She's the CEO of STAR. Racheal has a BA in Sociology and Women's Studies from LSU. She's a Houma native. Our second speaker is Morgan Lamandre, who is the legal director of STAR. If you are around the Capitol a lot, you've probably seen Morgan. She's a native of New Orleans. She has a BA in Sociology and minors in Political Science and Women and Gender Studies from LSU, and she has a law degree from Southern University. Welcome, guys.
Hello. Oh, two short people up on here. I don't know if I need to adjust or if you can hear me just fine. Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us at the Press Club today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for the introduction, Julie. My name's Racheal Hebert, and I'm president and CEO of STAR. Oh, am I good? Get it? Okay, thank you. Thank you. I have my colleague Morgan Lamandre here with me, who is our legal director. As some of you may know of a STAR, we do a lot of work with our legislative advocacy, and we are an organization that is housed here in the Baton Rouge area, and we have our roots here actually in the district attorney's office in East Baton Rouge Parish. STAR became a nonprofit in 2012, and we have since branched out. We have offices in Alexandria and New Orleans, and so we are very well known throughout the state for providing excellent survivor services as well as community education to help prevent sexual violence. Morgan is our legal director, and she spearheads our legal program, which provides direct representation to survivors in assault or legal-related matters that affected them after a sexual assault, and she's also been doing a lot of work at the legislature. What you have in front of you is our press release for this year's legislative scorecard, and I'll let Morgan talk a little bit more about that. But just to boast on the work Morgan and STAR have done over the past several years, we really champion survivors' rights and survivors' protections throughout the state of Louisiana. Some of our notable things include ensuring that survivors do not receive a bill after a forensic medical exam, as well as the many things that are listed in the scorecard that Morgan has worked very hard on this year in collaboration with many of our legislators as well as other community organizations. So I'll let Morgan talk a little bit more specifically about the scorecard now.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Because I'm even shorter than Racheal. So I'm Morgan Lamandre, and I am the legal director of STAR. And as Julie said, if you're around the Capitol, you will typically see me there. I typically call myself a pest because I'm always around pestering the legislators and trying to get them to support our bills. And I will say, overall, STAR has really a great bipartisan support for the bills that we champion. We don't see sexual assault and ending sexual violence as a political issue. We want everyone to support our bills, but this year, which I do have to correct something that we all gave you, it says our second annual scorecard. This is actually our third scorecard. We did not have a scorecard last year because of COVID and just not having very many bills to score. But this year we did resume having a scorecard. And as you can see from the scorecard, we did something a little different. Usually we have something called Shining Stars, and they score 100% on our scorecard. And then we have Rising Stars that score between 90 to 90 99%. This year we added a category called rock stars, and those are individuals who scored 100% on our scorecard, but also remained consistent on a bill, SB 156, that STAR was opposed to during the regular and veto sessions. So just to kind of take you through our scorecard, some of the things that we scored legislators on is we have our lease termination bill that was sponsored by Representative Freeman. It allowed sexual assault survivors to terminate their leases early. That's House Bill 375. We were lucky in that most legislators supported that bill. Some of the other things that we did that were a little different this year, usually we score on final passage of a bill. You'll see in the scorecard where we actually scored for House Bill 492, we scored on a procedural motion which allowed the legislators to hear a bill the same day that they received a conference committee report. The reason we scored that rather than the final passage of the bill is because everyone was very much in support of House Bill 492. It was a bill that would eliminate the prescriptive period for filing civil claims for minors who were sexually abused. So that was a bill that many people supported. But last day of the legislature, there was that procedural motion to hear the bill that day, and it is our opinion that that vote became a political issue, and so we felt it was necessary to highlight that vote rather than the final vote on the bill. So you'll see where just because somebody ultimately supported that bill, we decided to score the procedural vote, because in the end, if that would have failed, so would have the bill. So there's a couple of things like that are a little different this year in our scorecard, where we score procedural things. We are going to honor 2 legislative champions this year. Representative Amy Freeman, she carried quite a number of bills for us this year, and she also scored 100% on the scorecard. And we're also honoring Representative Jason Hughes. He also carried the bill that eliminated the prescriptive period for minors who were sexually abused. And both of them are Democrats and from the New Orleans area. Other than that, happy to take any questions about the scorecard. We don't look at this as a punitive thing. We look at our scorecard, as a way to educate the public and legislators on the bills that are important for survivors of sexual assault. Does anybody have any questions about it?
Thank you. We have a question from the audience about what our relationship is with LSU. After the USA Today article came out in November 2020, alleging sexual harassment and sexual assault mishandling. Thank you for that question. We have been very involved with LSU over the past 8 months to review their Title IX policies and procedures, as well as improve training opportunities for all staff at the university level, as well as specific training for those staff who handle Title IX and for those that are also involved in the confidential resources process. We're very excited to have done this work with LSU. Of course, it was very timely since that article had come out, and they have gotten a lot of negative press about past instances. They've even enlisted the help of Hush Blackwell, who provided an audit on their findings over the past several years, and several people from other universities that no longer work at LSU have been fired. We look at our work with LSU as one that's focused on culture change and social change. It's not something that's going to change overnight, but something that, as we continue to chip away at things that have been done incorrectly and revisit and recorrect things to move forward in a survivor and student-focused way, we feel very hopeful that these things can be corrected, and LSU and other universities around the state can become a better, safer environment for students.
Y'all didn't have a contract with LSU before the Hush Blackwell?
the question from the audience is, did we have a contract with LSU before the Hush Blackwell report? And we did not, although we had worked with LSU in several ways, specifically with their Lighthouse program at the main campus in Baton Rouge, to make sure survivors were always supported when they either reported or needed additional accommodations at the university. We're excited that the contract we do have, that we hope will continue to be renewed, deepens our commitment with LSU to provide a safe campus for students. Yes?
I was curious from the beginning of all of that episode, I guess, for our community. What's the chronology of it? Did the victims of sexual abuse seek you all out, or they seek the legislature, or members of that special committee, or just how did that work?
Do you mean with the USA Today article? Did the survivors, so the question is, how did, I guess, the USA Today article come about? I would say that we did not have a lot of involvement with USA Today. That was something, I'm not quite sure how it started, but I assume that there are survivors that were featured in that story that did want something to be done and spoke with reporters like yourself that really wanted to do some more investigation into why this is happening at LSU. So I think all of the credit really goes to those survivors that were very brave and were very motivated to ensure that their stories were told on a national platform. And you know, I can't thank survivors enough. They're changing LSU for the better forever. So I think the chronology of that really relied on those survivors coming forward, and they've really inspired so much change. So very grateful to them. Yes.
LSU gets all the attention, but the problem has to be more pervasive than that. What's your relationship with the State Board of Regents?
Thank you. The question is, the problem is more pervasive than LSU, and I absolutely agree. We do have a relationship with the Board of Regents, and we also have relationships with the other university and college systems in Louisiana, of which there are 4. We have worked closely with the Board of Regents on legislative issues, and specifically as it relates to training opportunities. And I understand that they're developing a more uniform statewide training for people that are going to be confidential advisors, which are basically people on campus that are not mandated reporters, but people that are there to provide assistance to students and faculty who need help navigating the system. So we absolutely know this is not an LSU-specific problem. However, they were in the media. And one thing, when I had the opportunity to speak in front of journalists, is I point out Jameis Winston, who is the current quarterback of the Saints, who has a very long history of sexual misconduct dating back to the time when he was at the University of Florida. And so I understand, and rightly so, our communities have outrage at LSU and how they've mishandled it. But my question to our community is, why do we continue to allow these things to happen when we know that we have star football players that have histories like this? Yes?
Can you talk, Rachel? I know I have like 2 questions and they're not really related. The first one is, can you, this is going to sound very basic, but can you talk about some like misperceptions you think people have about survivors of sexual assault and how they should be like behaving or acting, or how, you know, how you should interact with them? And then the second one is, I know you have very strong feelings about sex ed, and I was wondering if you could go into kind of what STAR does or recommends in terms of sex ed before,
Yes.
you know, before we get to adults, like college students.
Sure. So the first question is, what are some misconceptions of survivors or victims after a sexual assault, and of which there are many? And I do believe that, you know, there are a lot of pervasive myths about how sexual violence survivors experience the act of violence and how they act in the immediate aftermath and even months and years after. I will say that one of the biggest things that came out of this legislative session that I'm hopeful educated people is the prevalence of delayed reporting. And what you see quite often is survivors We expect people that experience sexual violence to be very emotional, to be crying, to have fought back, to run away. And many people, out of fear, out of the threats of the perpetrator, or even just shock and confusion about what's happening, actually do something called freeze. So they freeze, they feel paralyzed, they're very afraid when it is happening, but oftentimes that feeling of being paralyzed causes them to not seek support or not report right away because they're not really sure of what their options are. Whenever we're talking about victim presentation, a lot of the questions that come from our community are, why didn't you report? Or why did you wait so long to report? And the thing I always say is, well, look at the track record of us holding perpetrators accountable. And the reality of that is only 1 in 100 people that are arrested are going to actually spend a day in jail. And that is a startling national statistic from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. And so when we look at that, we can understand why a survivor might not feel it's worth reporting because nothing is going to happen. And also, their private personal information is going to be told to complete strangers. So, Julie, I hope I answered that question, but I can elaborate more. But the second part of Julie's question was comprehensive sex education in the state of Louisiana, and what is STAR's relationship and what is STAR's stance on that? I think it is incredibly important that we look at sexual health education as something that prevents sexual violence. And when we're looking at sex education, we're not just talking about the biological or physical aspects of sex education, but also the pro-social, the social emotional learning components that include topics such as consent, healthy sexuality, dating, communicating about dating and sex. All of these topics we know are part of primary prevention for sexual violence, which means it's something that we can implement before the act of violence happens. This is national best practices. It's pretty much the only thing we have to safeguard our youth from being in unhealthy relationships and possibly putting themselves at risk for being a victim or a perpetrator of sexual violence. However, this state has time and time again not allowed comprehensive sex education in schools. Did you have something to say? So our stance on that is that it is imperative that we pass this not just as an option for parishes and for school boards, but as a mandate, and put qualified people that are going to be able to teach this information, because that's really the only option we have for prevention. Yes?
Maybe piggybacking on that question, do you work directly at all with high school students in any part of the state, or what's your relationship with K-12?
Great question. The question is, what is STAR's relationship with K through 12 schools in the state? We are very open to working with both middle and high schools. We have 2 national curricula that we use. One is called Shifting Boundaries. It's used in grades 4 through 6, and then something called Safe Dates, which is used in 9th through 12th grade. These are 2 curricula that we have 1 staff member in each of our branches available to provide. So that's obviously not enough resources to meet every middle and high school in our service area, but it is a starting point. Now, because we don't have a very centralized relationship with the school board, and it's kind of up to the individual schools whether or not they want to implement the programming, which is a challenge for us because, of course, it all depends on relationships. And then, of course, the topic could be touchy, and our title of our organization is Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response. So it has been difficult for us to get long-standing relationships with multiple schools.
Have you ever talked to the folks at iCare? Have you ever had any association with iCare?
We do have, the question is, do we have an association with iCare, which is an organization here in the Baton Rouge area? We do. We sit on the iCare Prevention Coalition. So we have a very good connection with the iCare workers that are placed in schools. Yes, ma'am.
I'm friends with Mindy. Okay. So I know that STAR is a nonprofit, but I know
Sure. The question is, how does STAR become involved, specifically when a survivor is reporting and going through the investigation process? So STAR has 3 basic programs we provide for survivors. The foundation of our programming is called advocacy. We have a 24-hour hotline. We accompany survivors to the hospital for a forensic medical exam, as well as accompany them to meetings with law enforcement, prosecutors, as well as any court proceedings. So we have very good relationships with local hospitals as well as local law enforcement. So whenever a survivor is in the initial stages of reporting, they contact the STAR hotline, who dispatches an advocate to be with that survivor during the medical exam and reporting process. We have found that this is one of the best ways to support survivors because, as you can imagine, going through an exam, sitting with a law enforcement officer, and essentially talking about the worst thing that's ever happened to you can be a very daunting experience. So our advocates provide a safe space, they provide emotional support, and help them navigate those options. We also stay with them throughout the proceeding of the case. So if they decide to proceed with reporting, we stay with them. We're a liaison with law enforcement. And then we can also help them access one of our other programs, which is counseling. So we provide group and individual counseling to survivors at any point in their healing. And we do so through grants that allow us to provide those services free of charge. Morgan here is our director of our legal program, and so as we work with survivors and they have any legal matters that may have come from their sexual assault, we refer them to our legal program, and that can include things like protective orders, any type of intervention needed with an employer or with a school, certainly OCR, Title IX complaints, different things like that. So we like to consider ourselves a very comprehensive and holistic organization that's very directly focused on survivors of sexual violence needs. Yes?
Question for Morgan, I guess, and I may have missed it, but where are you legislatively? Do you need something else to get money to introduce this bill? Bills introduced this coming year?
So the question was whether or not we have plans to introduce more bills, in the coming years, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. Yes.
More bills and what subject?
Yeah, so obviously every year we are at the Capitol, it usually is derived from some sort of issue a survivor directly experiences. We definitely have a laundry list of things that we still want to accomplish. One of the big things that we really are hoping to accomplish in the coming years, and it's something that's been on our to-do list, but it's just very hard, is to get funding for sexual assault centers in Louisiana. We were fortunate this year in that STAR received a allocation of funds from the legislature, but it's something that we hope is more done in for all sexual assault centers, and to have a consistent funding process for sexual assault services. So that's sort of the big to do for us, but there's just a number of different things that we would like for survivors. Some just really technical changes in the law that allow things like only help survivors who were younger than 17, but it doesn't help 17-year-old sexual assault survivors, which they're still minors. Then there's some other more comprehensive things, but we definitely will have a full package next year and in the coming years, and we hope to get more sponsors, new sponsors. Anybody who's in the legislature right now in this audience, we're happy for you to pick up one of our bills. So yes, we have a number of things that are on our to-do list.
For counseling, you are headquartered here in Baton Rouge, but you say you do counseling. Do you do it teleconferencing? Do you do it Zoom? Do you come to Baton Rouge? How is that handled?
So the question is, if our main office is in Baton Rouge and we provide counseling, how do we get to people from other parts of the state? So we actually have 3 offices. We have an office in New Orleans, as well as Alexandria and Baton Rouge. We have counselors housed in each office to provide one-on-one support. But one of the gifts that the pandemic has given us is the availability of telehealth. And so we have been able to transition very quickly to providing virtual counseling as well as other services that can allow us to reach people in more rural areas. And so while we have 3 main hubs, we serve 15 parishes throughout the state in Central and South Louisiana. And so telehealth has really been great to allow us to increase our access. Oh, Morgan wants to say one more thing.
Yeah, and just one other thing about that, though, that, you know, people typically hear about STAR at the Capitol, and we receive requests for services all throughout the state, but we do only cover 15 parishes in the state. So there really is a need for there to be more funding for sexual assault centers throughout the state, but really for us to maybe possibly open up some more STARs, you know, throughout the state, because I will say we are not able to keep up with the request, and we have to prioritize those requests. I'm pretty sure right now we probably have a wait list at each location for counseling, because our counseling, it's not just sort of a peer support, it's licensed clinical social workers or professional counselors. We have quite a number of them trained in EMDR, which Racheal could tell you more about that. But I mean, you know, one of the things at STAR is just because we're a nonprofit and survivors do not pay us for our services doesn't mean we believe the quality of our services is that of something that would be free. So that's really important to us to have quality services.
I may have missed this, but what is your relationship with police?
So the question was, what is our relationship with the police? I think that we have in certain service areas more relationships in terms of being on different boards, being on different regional coalitions with law enforcement officers. We definitely, no matter where we serve, in the parishes we serve, try to connect with law enforcement, meet them, and we have overall, I would say, positive relationships with law enforcement. In East Baton Rouge Parish, we are lucky that we receive contributions from our local police departments, the Sheriff's Office and the Baton Rouge City Police. But, you know, in the end, I think that there are some jurisdictions where it's harder for us to connect and really make those relationships with law enforcement, either because they're understaffed, don't have, you know, many resources, or there are the, you know, odd ones that just don't want a relationship with anybody who's trying to advocate for survivors when maybe they are being, their rights are being violated from that organization.
Just to add to that, I think it's helpful to note about law enforcement and our relationship. Sexual violence, and specifically rape and sexual battery, are the most underreported crimes across the nation. In fact, in 2019, the Department of Justice found that only 33% of rapes and assaults were reported to police. And so while police and our relationships with police are very critical, we know that the majority of our clients are not going through the criminal justice system. And one thing Morgan says often is justice doesn't always mean jail. And so for us, when we work with law enforcement, we view ourselves as a partner in the work. There's several components. There's the police response. There's also the sexual assault nurse examiners, which is housed here in the East Baton Rouge Coroner's Office. They provide the medical exam. And then there's also the victim advocates like STAR. And so we each have an important role to play to ensure that the survivor is getting the best services possible and they have options when moving forward. Yeah.
Do you send a, I guess I'll ask this in two different ways. Is there a district attorney's office and like separately another law enforcement, police, or sheriff's office or something that you all think does the best job in your coverage area for doing these things?
Can I answer that?
Oh, good. Morgan's going to answer it.
So I don't want to say the best job, right? Because there's always different experiences with survivors that, you know, one survivor could have the best experience in a particular district attorney's office.
Making a good effort? Is that
Well, Definitely, I think there are. I'll say, for example, if we encounter a problem in East Baton Rouge Parish, Hiller Moore is very accessible to us and he wants to know what the problem is. So I will say, in terms of response and in terms of having access to the district attorney's office, I would say he gives us a lot of access and he wants to hear what the issues are. Recently, we've also had more of a relationship with the New Orleans District Attorney's Office. Jason Williams has made himself available, as well as his staff, to address issues and things with survivors. So I'd say there's there's more access overall. Every district attorney's office also encounters high turnover in law enforcement. So it's different survivors have different experiences depending on the day of the week, but in terms of getting an issue resolved, I would say New Orleans and East Baton Rouge have definitely helped us in terms of addressing issues if something has happened for a survivor.
Can I add to that? Mm-hmm. And just to add our measure of what we consider best, we really look at it from a survivor-focused lens. So when we work with prosecutors that are very informative to the survivor about what the next steps are, about what the options are, that they're very transparent about how the case might proceed, that they give the survivor basically the reins to figure out what's best for them. Those are the best prosecutors that we work with. And we're lucky to have a few of those in the state, but it's not really something we have a ton of training on. It's not really something, like Morgan said, we can maintain because of the turnover, both with law enforcement and district attorneys. But for us, that's sort of how we measure who's doing the best job. Yes?
In terms of counselors, I know as a nonprofit, it's probably tough to attract counselors and get them to stay on. How much of a challenge has that been in this whole process?
Oh, wow, you're speaking my language today. The question is, as a nonprofit, how are you able to keep counselors? That's definitely a challenge for us, both with counselors and attorneys who can make way more money doing private practice or different types of law practice. So for us, we've been very fortunate that we've found people very connected to the mission. But as Morgan mentioned, we'd love more state funding to pay people well so they don't leave us. Thank you. But certainly that has been a biggest challenge for us, and thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, and just one other thing to add, it's also the topic and the issue. Even the most resilient counselors or attorneys have breaking points at certain times, and I think that even for myself, I've have a supportive organization that we do give time off, but there comes a time where it creeps up into sort of your day-to-day life. I posted something recently on Facebook that somebody sent me, and it was this talk that this woman had given, and she's like, it's actually not considered normal for you to do these extensive background check on anybody who interacts with your children. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do that, but I thought everyone did that and really looks into who all their children, there's a lot of things that we do to cope. Sometimes there are coping mechanisms, and counselors or attorneys leave STAR because they can't, it is tough. It is very tough, so.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.